In this section, we're going to introduce a computer network and discuss how different computers communicate over the networks. For this course, a network is going to be all of the stuff that connects computers and devices and allow them to communicate to each other. There's lots of stuff that goes into a network, and we're going to discuss some of that stuff. You can also think of it as the infrastructure behind all the connectivity. When most people think of the network, they think of the internet. And that's obviously the biggest computer network in the world, and which is going to dominate our society for many years to come. The web, or the World Wide Web, is the biggest piece of the internet puzzle, but the internet is more than just the World Wide Web. And we'll discuss that briefly at the end of this section. Before we get started, we're going to have a basic conversation about communication. And we're going to talk about a non-computer use of communication first to make sure that we understand what we mean when we discuss communication. The first topic I want to discuss is synchronous versus asynchronous communication. And you probably haven't given much thought to this, but synchronous communication happens in real time. A good example might be a conversation you have with your friend, or maybe a television being broadcast over regular airwaves or a radio station, or there's other types of synchronous communication through devices, walkie-talkies and old telephones of the like. Alternatively, there's asynchronous communication. And the example I'm going to use, the alternative to synchronous communication is asynchronous communication. And the example I'm going to use here are postcards. Now, hopefully, you're listening to this video in a world where we still have mail systems and you understand what a postcard is. But in case you are unfamiliar with the concept, a postcard is you write someone's address and a little message and you put it on a stamp and you put it in a physical mailbox and then it gets delivered to your friends somewhere else in the world. So with a postcard, when the postcards are actually sent could be weeks, days, months apart. And so what you do is you write on the postcard often what day you sent it. July 22nd, 2017. Hi, how are you? So the idea is you put a timestamp on the message and then send it off to your friend. This is an example of asynchronous communication. You can still be communicating at the same time. He may be sending you a postcard and you may be sending them a postcard, but how they're delivered and when they are chosen to be sent is not done on a particular schedule. So this is called asynchronous communication. And asynchronous communication is actually how all of the internet works. You may be using a real-time chat like Skype or some other Google Talk where you're talking to your friends and it appears that it's real time. But behind the scenes, it's actually more like the postcard model. And we're going to talk about this later. So all of the internet communication is asynchronous communication. Just like your texts with your friends. It may seem like you're texting in real time, but the timing and all the information for that text is actually bundled in with your text. When you say, "Hello, Bob, how are you?" on your text message, the text message embeds in it the timestamp for when you actually sent Bob that message. And that is usually an indicator of when asynchronous communication is being used. As soon as you put a time on it, like the date on a postcard or the timestamp for a text, that indicates that it's asynchronous communication. So again, real-time communication on the internet appears synchronous, but behind the scenes, it's actually asynchronous. The majority of the conversation we're going to have in this module is actually about different layers of communication. So I'm going to explain what I mean by layers of communication, again, using a non-computer example. So when we talk about communication, we're often talking about messages. So when a message arrives or comes in, it goes from low layers of communication to high layers of communication. And conversely, when you want to send a message, you go from high layers of communication down to low layers of communication. And what I'm going to do is show you a concrete example of what I mean by this, because it'll really help clarify. What I'm going to do is walk you through an example of an incoming message from its source to its destination. Consider the example where you're going to say hello to your friend. But there's a lot happening there that you may not quite appreciate. For you to say hello, you push air from your lungs, and that interacts with your vocal cords and other parts of your body like your lips and your teeth. If you don't believe me, try saying a sentence without using your lips and your teeth. Go ahead, I'll wait right now. It's pretty hard to talk without using your lips and your teeth. So all of these things are working in conjunction to produce a sound wave. So what a sound wave is it's actually force exerted on air molecules. So when you talk, you're actually vibrating air molecules in the air. And that is what's carrying your voice to your friend. When you say hello, all of that's happening. It comes up through your lungs, through your mouth and your teeth, and then it vibrates the air around you. So the air molecules are vibrating, and eventually it reaches your friend's ear, and it goes into their ear canal and starts vibrating all those little yucky parts of your ear that I don't like to think about because it grosses me out. But you've probably learned when you're a little child that there's a bunch of moving parts in your ear, and that stimulates a nerve, and that nerve goes to your brain, and then your brain interprets those vibrations as frequencies. If you've ever seen a display of music where you see frequency bars going up and down, that's how your brain processes that audio signal. Then your brain constructs those frequencies into something called phonemes. So phonemes are little pieces of sound bites that you recognize. So for hello, it might be ha, oh, right? And every word is made up of a sequence of phonemes. So you put all those phonemes together in your brain and it comes up with the word hello. And now your brain can recognize that you said the word hello. But there's even higher layers than that, because when you hear the word hello, it actually means something to you. It's not just gibberish. It means someone is greeting you, and you now have a higher level understanding that this person is trying to greet you. We could go even higher levels because the way or the nuance of the way they said hello might be meaningful. You might be bumping into your ex-boyfriend at a party and he goes, hello. And that might mean something more differently than someone, hello, or spoofing something else like that. So there's an actual semantic meaning going on top of just the words. And what I'm showing you right now is that there's multiple layers to the communication. When it came in, it was at a very low layer. We're talking about air molecules vibrating, and then that goes into your ear and becomes a signal that goes to your brain, and your brain interprets those as phonemes, and then you put those phonemes together to make the word hello, and then you understand the word hello and what its semantic meaning is, and then you may have an extra layer on top of that. So all of this is happening whenever you hear someone saying just a simple word like hello. Communication is really quite amazing. It's going through all of these steps all the time whenever you're communicating it. Now, of course, this is just a model of how communication happens in the real world, but it's very useful for us to understand this. And when you communicate in the real world, I want you to think about how this is all happening. Let's go in the reverse order. When you send a message, you go from a very high layer in your brain. You think, oh, I want to greet someone. What should I say? Oh, I'm going to pick the word hello. Okay, so then now that you decided hello, you're going to have brain impulses that go down to your lungs and your mouth and your teeth that make you actually say the word hello through those phoneme sounds. And then eventually those phonemes come out of your mouth and vibrate the air molecules, and it's right back down to the lowest layer. So again, when you have an incoming message, it starts at a low layer and then goes all the way up to the high layer where you can actually interpret it and understand it. Conversely, when you're sending out a message, it goes from the highest layer all the way down to the lowest layer. Now in practice, just to make the discussion go easier, we can collapse many of those layers down. So let's just simplify our model and say that when you're having a voice conversation, the lowest level is going to be sound waves, and then that gets reconstructed into phonemes, which then becomes words, and then you have the semantic meaning of the words, the actual understanding of what those words mean. And this is how a regular vocal conversation happens. Now let's go back to the example I mentioned before, where we're talking about postcards, and you want to send your friend a message on a postcard. Well, that too has several layers of communication. So when your friend receives a postcard from you, first they get a physical postcard in the mail, and then they look at the letters on the postcard, and then they combine those letters into words, and then they understand the meaning of those words. So the same sort of layers of communication are happening. The physical medium, though, is different. Instead of air molecules and phonemes that happen with spoken word, we get the mail delivery system and letters on the postcard. But what's interesting is the higher layers are the same. So if you want to say hello, you can write it on a piece of paper and give it to your friend, or you can say hello, but the semantic meaning of what's actually happening is the same. Now, human communication is very complicated, so I'm not going to get into the nuances of body language and all these other things that come into it. Obviously, we could have a long discussion about that, and that's not what I want to talk about. What I want to talk about is this model of how we move from low layers to high layers, and that multiple messages can be sent in different ways and actually have different lower layers but at the higher layers, they actually mean the same thing. The final concept I want to get through in this video is the concept of protocols. So the main example I want you to think about is a handshake protocol. You're greeting someone, so you reach out your hand and they see that and they go, oh, this person wants to shake hands with me, so they reach out their hands and then you grasp hands and move it up and down and then you let go. Or if you're a member of a fraternity, a sorority, or some secret club, you may have a secret handshake or something like that, but you have the basic idea. This is how the protocol works when someone holds out their hand and wants to greet you. In verbal communication, there's other protocols. You don't speak too loudly, you don't speak too quietly, you don't stand too close to someone else. All the things go into just normal protocols of everyday speech. For a postcard, there's very specific protocols. You need a stamp. The stamp has to be a valid stamp. You can't just draw the stamp. You need an address. You can't just say, I want to send a message to Bob in Toronto. That will not get delivered properly. You need to give a specific address and postal code, and you have to put them in specific spots on the postcard. And this is all part of the protocol for how to send a postcard. And as it turns out, every layer of communication has some protocols. Some are more strict than others, some are more complicated, some are very basic, but every layer has a protocol, and that is how the communication actually happens. Later on, I'm going to mention some computer protocols. And the best way to think about a computer protocol is a form. Like say you go to the doctor and they want you to fill out a form about, are you allergic to penicillin? Are you contagious? Have you contracted any diseases or been to any farms? All these kind of forms that you must fill out when you go to the doctor or travel to a different country. That is a protocol. You are filling out the form and filling out your name in a certain spot and checking certain boxes. And that is the type of protocol that actually happens quite frequently with computer communication. Filling out a form and putting the right fields in the right form and then passing that form on to somebody else. All of that really is very similar to a handshake. You reach out your hand, the other person knows where to put their hand. Sometimes people screw it up, but for most people, they can shake hands without any miscommunication. And that is an example of a protocol.